Welcome everybody. In this video, we're just going to take a few minutes and explore the basics of the Arkime user interface or UI. If you need help getting started with Arkime, then please take a moment and check out the video I posted just before this. That'll help you with the installation and some of the options in getting Arkime up and running. For this video then, we're going to be relying on Pcaps. So I'm not going to be setting up Arkime to use the capture service to be running in real time to capture that network traffic in real time. Instead, I'm going to use this process Pcaps script. Again, introduced that in the last video, so if you're not familiar with it, it's probably worth just taking a few minutes to watch that. But this will, using the Arkime process or Arkime capture service, it will ingest a Pcap. So that is a capability that Arkime has in addition to listening to live network traffic. This script really makes it pretty easy. Overall, it clears any previous data from the Elastic cluster and then locally from the Arkime node. It restarts the Arkime viewer, and then it just says, hey, give this a few seconds because we're dealing with Elastic. So it might just take a minute or two before that data is available for consumption via the Arkime UI. Okay, before we switch over to the viewer, it's helpful just to make sure that it is in fact up and running. You can use systemctl to check the status of your Arkime viewer.service. It should be in an active and running state. If that's the case, then you'll have the ability to just open your browser here. We'll do that in a minute, and go to port 8005. That's the default setup. Of course, if you've deviated from that by making modifications to the config, you'll just have to make sure that you use the right port. If it is not in an active state, if it says loaded, then you can go ahead and use the start command in order to get that viewer up and running, and then check the viewer status after that to make sure that you do have an active or running state. If for some reason it is not, you cannot get it to be active, then you do need to check the logs. You can find those available under opt Arkime logs. Right now I just have viewer.log, but if the capture service was running or where we were having problems getting that capture service to run, this would be another location to check that out. Okay, with that, we can open a browser. You can go to localhost port 8005, and you'll be prompted to log in. Those will be the username and password that you set up when getting Arkime originally configured. You'll notice that we just processed a Pcap, but there's no data. And we know there's no data because there's a dialog there towards the bottom of the interface saying that there is no results or nothing matched with your search within the appropriate or the selected time range. So what we need to do then, probably the first thing, is just get familiar with the time filter. With this dropdown, you have the ability to choose from a number of relative time frames. So the last hour, the last 6 hours, all the way down to all. It does caution you to be careful with all, and that is a true statement. With a Pcap, we have very small amount of data in our Elastic cluster, so it's pretty safe to do that in this particular instance. But if we were working on a production system and we had a lot more data in our Elastic cluster, we'd want to be careful here because this could have a very significant, very negative impact on the cluster, the performance of the cluster, and even the availability. Next to that, we have time date pickers, so we can get very granular in the time that we choose down to the actual seconds. You'll also see in just a moment that we have the ability to filter on times based off of the actual sessions, the time at which those were captured. Now, one thing to keep in mind with looking at network traffic that is ingested via Pcap versus real time from the network interface is that those Pcaps are going to Arkime is going to use the original timestamp from those Pcaps. So this Pcap that I'm using was from late 2021, and you'll see that once we adjusted that time filter, now we can see the data from that particular Pcap. Okay, so good. It looks like we have data. That was the first thing that we wanted to ensure. Now we can really just start at the top. And one of the first things that I want to point out is if you need help, help is just a click away. Up in the corner, you can click on the owl icon, and that will take you to all of the help for Arkime. So this is a really quick and easy way to get insight into pretty much everything that you can do within Arkime. So if you get lost, you don't have to go searching around on the online docs. You have help built in right here. Okay, aside from that, we have the major areas of sort of functionality. We have the Sessions tab, which is what we're on right now. We have SPI view, SPI graph connections, hunt files, stat history, settings, users. And we'll talk about all those here as we go. Below that is the search box. This is probably one of the most important and powerful features, and that it gives you the ability to now create queries based off of the data that's available in your instance. We can type these by hand. So there's really two ways that I typically create filters. One is that I start typing because I know of a field that I want to filter on. As you do that, you can see that you get the drop down with an autocomplete, a series of options that are actually available. So if we wanted to look at just protocols, we could say protocols equals, and let's say we want to look at just the HTTP protocol or TCP or whatever protocol we're interested in. You use typical conditional logic, equal, greater than, less than, not equal to, depending on the type of fields that you're using. The other way to do that is that pretty much every field, if you hover over it and it exposes this drop down, then you can click on that and then add it as appropriate. So if we wanted to say protocol equals HTTP and not source port 49206, now that'll add that with the appropriate Boolean logic between those two conditions. So it makes it really easy, whether you're typing them manually or you're exploring the interface and just clicking on different features, clicking on those different properties and adding those to the search above. Once you've created the query that you want, you can click search, and then that will filter your results accordingly. So this was kind of a silly one here, but as you can see, it updates the session, and that query now will be sticky through really all of the other different major features that we go through. So keep that in mind as we go from maybe sessions to SPI view. If we have a filter in place, then that will remain sort of sticky through there. So it'll affect those later views that we navigate to. Okay, your results are based off of the filter. So if we just remove all of our filters, go back to our results, that will be all of the traffic that was captured in that Pcap. Below the time and date field, we have then the pagination. So how many entries are we seeing per page? How many pages do we have? How many total entries? 1 through 50 of 52. Below that, we have a graph that represents sessions by default, but you can choose how you're viewing that, whether that's number of sessions, packets, bytes, data bytes, and then other options, the zoom, lines, and bars. This is done over time. And while this Pcap doesn't really represent it well because there isn't a lot of actual data here, you do have the ability then to very easily select time ranges here and zoom in further. And then that will allow you to kind of quickly pivot. Let's say you're looking at a bar graph that has certain spikes of activity. You'll be able to zoom into that rather quickly. So a very helpful feature. Okay, I'll go back to all. Below that now, we get into the actual data. So here on the Sessions tab, we have the sessions. This is a connection of some sort, whether it's TCP or where you do have a full connection established, or something more like UDP, in which case at least a packet was sent. Going from left to right then, you have the ability to expand each one of those sessions. We'll do that in a moment. Each column then, of course, represents different kind of views into that session. So we have the start time, the stop time, the source IP and country if you have configured the max-mine geo-IP information. We have the source port, the destination IP or country, the destination port, number of packets, data bytes, the node that it captured from. So maybe you're working in an environment where you have several capture Arkime instances running it to capture network traffic, dumping them into one singular elastic cluster. You can look at then different traffic from different aspects or different parts of your network. We have info, not a lot of info right here, but if you look at, let's do protocol equals HTTP, you'll see that that's the kind of information that you'll get in that info column. So for HTTP protocol, you'll see the URI, which also can be very helpful because now we can very quickly see that, not only do we have some HTTP requests, all of these are, but these right here that are to port 80, we can actually see the host and the whole URI. So we can see we have some requests to some WordPress sites for a pp.png file. So some things that almost instantly stand out as suspicious or at least interesting that might be worth an investigation. Now, this is just from a Pcap. Of course, if we were looking at an enterprise network, this would be a lot harder to just simply say, let's look at HTTP and find these interesting things. So there's power of the query is the ability then to continue to filter down your traffic and go from maybe a very broad view to a very narrow view to find these interesting patterns and observations. And that's a topic for another video, because right now we're just going to focus on the main components of the UI, but that's just to give you some ideas of where this search and query capability can take you. Okay, so now we have the ability to expand any of these sessions. And what this is doing is it's loading additional data from the Elastic cluster. It's actually also reading from the Pcap. So at times, if you have problems with your setup, you might find, especially as we get down a little bit further, this is content that is read out of the Pcap. It's not indexed into Elastic. So if you have problems with your setup, you might find Arkime warning you that it can't read this data. And there might be something wrong either with the way that it's archiving those Pcaps. The Pcaps aren't there. Maybe there's some permission errors. Before we get all the way down there, though, we have the ability to download Pcaps, look at the raw source, the raw destination. There's some additional actions here in terms of adding tags and exporting this part of the traffic as a Pcap. We have all of the data that was indexed. And again, you can see with this default view that anything that has this, this tealish blue color means that you can hover over it and you can now add it as a filter. Most of this data will be just pulled or parsed directly from the Pcap. Some of it's going to be generated. Things like the community ID, for example, that's generated based off of different properties of the session in order to allow you to coordinate or collaborate this particular session with other tools, such as a Suricata instance. You'll notice that we have, since this was a TCP session, we have information about that TCP session, the protocols, the flags that were set, and then we get into, because there was an application layer protocol here, then we get into the HTTP specifics. So you can see things like the method. This was a GET request. The status code response was a 200. Different headers, the MD5 of the body. Anything that was seen in that request response conversation will be seen here. If we scroll down a little bit, this is where we can get into really the body of that request response. So this is kind of like a Wireshark view at this point. We have the headers, which are indexed, as you saw above. And same with the response content. Those are going to be indexed as you saw above. But if there was any body for either the request body or in this case the response body, that information isn't. So now we can see that, oh, it looks like this response, even though it was for something that, it doesn't really clearly identify what this resource was. It wasn't requesting, sample.exe. We can see in that response that it was in fact a PE file, an executable file. There's the MZ signature, there's the DOS stub, and then there's just the rest of the file. Looking at that content can also provide insight into what is going on in the traffic. If we wanted to try to download that, we have some different options here. These options can change how we're viewing this data. We can change the view to hex. So if we're looking at maybe binary content, this can be a very helpful thing to do, particularly with this file, the PE file. It takes on a little bit more structure because it is a file format. It is structured. So we can see that a little easier here in the hex view. But the default is this natural view. So we'll go back to that. You have this unXOR brute gzip header decoding. So I haven't found that to be too useful in my own analysis, but you do have the ability then to try to XOR some of the content here. There is some unbase64, but we don't have any base64 encoding here, so we don't have to worry about that. We have the options under here to show images and files. And what will happen here in this case, Arkime has identified this as potentially a file. And so by changing that view, we have the ability to download this content. So that'll download as a .pellet. This Pcap, this is an executable file. This is malware. So we'd want to be very careful in how we handle that, making sure that we don't accidentally infect ourselves. That packet option, we can hide images and files now and go back to being able to just look at that raw content. As you explore sessions, you can close them, or if you go to the upper right here, you'll have a list of all of your open sessions. Sometimes I get quite a view, quite a list of these things open, so you can quickly close those using that toggle there. And now you're able to just continue to explore. So let's say we're looking at protocol TLS, and we see that we have, let's say we want to say, and not port 80, but port 443. So I might use a filter such as this, even though it's not the one I want, it's the right field, and then I can modify it. So that'll get the syntax up there on the query filter. And now we can very quickly look at all of the communications that were TLS sessions that were not to port 443. So TLS sessions that were not to a standard port. This is the kind of thing that we can do very quickly with Arkime. And now you can explore, small ranges of time, again, different segments of your network to, looking at very large swaths and then continuing to filter down from there. Okay, if we move over, let's start looking at other content. SPI view. SPI view is another really very powerful tab. You'll see that one of the first things likely, you'll get this warning about the all date range is not allowed. One way to fix that, again, an instance with very limited data, is we just add a second to the start time, or we subtract a second from the end time. Whatever you got to do, it just makes that so that's actually not the all date frame. Okay, once you apply that, you'll begin to see results. Keep in mind though that any filters that you have are applied to this view. So if we don't want these filters, then it's easy to remove those, research, and now we're getting a view of all of the data in our environment. So this can take a little bit of time, even with a limited amount of data. As things start to load, you'll see there's that little spinning icon, and of course, as that goes away, you'll either get information, as you can see here, or you'll get a message saying that no data was available. Now, what this ultimately does, it provides you with a view into the different protocols. Oops, click that one too many times. The different protocols that are available. So it makes it really easy to explore kind of the big picture of what's going on with the traffic that you're looking at. General is just that. You have general information about traffic protocols that have been indexed, UDP, TCP, ICMP in this case. And then as you view this different, kind of go down this list of available protocols, if there's data there, it'll indicate that. So we have nothing in BGP, CERT, or DHCP, but we have activity in DNS, or we have activity in HTTP. By default, these don't load. Again, there's a little bit of a performance impact. So you have to expand them and then click load all. So I've already done that with HTTP, expanded it, and then clicked load all. And you can see that overall, this category is still loading. Now, as you scroll through this, again, you'll see a bunch of data here. And so everything that's been indexed is available. What is the field name? And then what are the possible values along with those counts? A lot of really good information here. One that is interesting is always user agent. So we can look at what user agents were present in the traffic that we're investigating. We can see there was only two. One is WSD API, and the other is this Mozilla /O. So if we were interested in saying, okay, I don't care about WSD API, that's all Microsoft stuff, then we could quickly create a filter and say, let's not include that in the view. Conversely, if we were interested in only this user agent, let's say it stood out, we could add that as an and. And now we're only going to get traffic related to data that contains this user agent field. So it helps to look at summary information and then again begin to pivot based off of what data is actually present here. Okay, the next field is the SPI graph. You can see SPI session profile information. I kind of forget what that is sometimes, so let's open up the help. And here is the SPI graph. Let's see, the SPI view. So session profile information. Okay, so that's what that stands for. Again, the help can be helpful. But this just gives you another view into activity over time. So it allows you to see, in this case, not a lot from this Pcap, but we have a little spike of activity here. So if we were filtering based off of protocols or certain, we set a certain parameter to view, then this would allow us to look at that activity and maybe go, oh, this is a spike in activity. Let's zoom into that and let's see what's going on. And as you saw, even this is very similar capability with the session tab. It's very easy to just highlight the part of the graph that we want to zoom in on. And now you can see there is our activity. So maybe this is what we were interested in. We could highlight that, select it, and now based off of that, that's adjusted our time frame. We could go back to sessions view. All right, and this is actually what occurred during that session. We had some, looks like some HTTP requests. Okay, connections is the next one. And I'm going to reset this. Let's go last year. This is just going to give you a graph of nodes based off of source and destination. So with this one, we have one primary host 192.168.56.102, and then we have several nodes that it communicated with. So this just allows us to see who's talking to who in a graphical sort of way. Okay, the next tab is Hunt. You might find after an initial setup that you actually don't have permissions, even though you're the admin user, to do Hunt. So you do need to look at under Settings. Under Users. Here's the admin user that we set up. Check the box for Can Create Hunts, and then, yeah, there you go. You'll get a save. So I've already done that. And now when you go to the Hunt tab, you can create hunts. This, just simply put, is a way to explore the data that is not indexed. So the actual payloads in those packets, this will search for those. And there's a number of ways you can do the search. But when you need to look for, let's say we're looking for PE files, well, there's really not a great way to do that. There are some indirect ways, but if we were looking for very specifics, maybe the DOS stub, which was that string, this program cannot be run in DOS mode, this is likely the way that you would do that. So you can set these up to run instantaneously. You can set them up on a timer, and then they'll generate alerts. They can go through a series of notifications to let you know when a hunt has matched. We won't get into that right now. That's probably a topic for another video. Files and stats, that's just information about your cluster. So those are management things. Same with history. And then settings, as you can see here, you can explore just how your Arkime instance is going to work, down to things like notifiers and themes, as well as those users. So here's where you'd create additional users, additional roles to determine who could do what. So an example would be, you might not want your newest analyst to have the ability to create a hunt, because a hunt can have a performance impact on Arkime and on Elastic. So you give them a limited account where they can't do that, but they can still log into the sessions. So all of that is able to be controlled through here. Okay, so this is Arkime. This is the basics of the UI and how you can begin to use it. Again, a lot more that we can explore here, so I anticipate some follow-on videos here as we get into specific capabilities. I also have a full course on Pluralsight, so please consider checking that out. I'll drop the link here in the video, and if you have any questions, please feel free to use the comments below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope this helps you get started with Arkime. It's an awesome tool, and I'll talk to you all in the next video.